Okay, I think we're pretty much there. So there may be some other people joining us shortly, but firstly, hi everyone. Lovely to see you. As I say, I think most people are here now. It is a lovely day today, certainly here where I am in the lakes, hopefully where you are too. So thanks for joining us today. As I think most of you are aware, we've put this series together to support you through this still ongoing time, and we hope that you find today's session and any others that you attend useful to your role as a mountaineering professional. I'd really like to thank Activities Industry Mutual for agreeing to deliver this session, and I'll introduce today's speaker really shortly. If we can just, we'll just look at the slides and just run through there's a brief etiquette, I guess. I'm sure it's been Zoom Central recently, but just to remind you, have your mics off. If you're going to be moving about and potentially doing other stuff, if we can ask you to, maybe switch your video off. We will take questions at the end, and there's quite a few of you, so just bear with us if we don't get to your question immediately. When you have a question, if you can direct that to everybody, not just the main presenter, that's more helpful for us. That would be great, thank you. And you can either do that by, raising a hand or writing in the chat box. So hopefully that's enough of the housekeeping. So if we go on to the next slide, then what I would like to do is introduce Sophia Reid, who can give us a wave. We're delighted that she's here today. I'll let Sophia introduce herself, and we'll begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, if Cress waves to make sure that you can hear me. Cool, thank you. So thank you very, very much for inviting me to talk today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm sure we'd all much rather be up mountains, but at least the sun is shining and it's not raining. So 9 weeks ago, I think I'd used Zoom inadvertently once or twice without even realising. And now it seems to be a completely daily occurrence. I don't know how you guys are finding it. So thank you for attending. And we are literally in a brave new world, aren't we? What I wanted to do is just run through basically an outline of what we're going to be looking at today. I'm hoping it's going to be helpful. I will just stress that this is not a legal opinion, and it's suggested guidance and suggested thoughts while we are establishing how the future might look. So it is a brave new world, isn't it? And possibly we may never return to what we now deem to have been normal. We're all experiencing issues, we're all experiencing different issues, and these will be different for each and every one of us. Some people may, with the easing of the restrictions currently underway, be able to resume activities soon, possibly before others of us, but it may take much, much longer for other providers. And we need to be safe. And I think the most important message is that we need to ensure that we are safe, our visitors, our participants and our staff are safe. And we need to ensure strict adherence to government instructions. And sometimes I use the word instructions rather than guidance, because I think in some situations it's a bit more than guidance. So let's crack on. It's brilliant to see, I will say, loads of collaboration at the moment between so many sectors of our industry, and I think that can only be a really good thing and to help us as we go forward. So just looking at today's webinar, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction about me in case you don't know me, and also AIM, the Activity Industry Mutual, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we say AIM. Looking at the current COVID issues, top tips for now and the future, and then I'm going to look at a little bit about accident prevention, claims defensibility, documentation and lessons learned, and then we'll have some questions at the end, if that's okay. So I thought it might be useful to show you at least me up a mountain anyway, rather than sitting in my home office. So that is me going up the pig trail on Snowdon, which we did last year as part of a fundraising event, and then me at the top of Snowdon. I've got a history of loving the mountains, and having been initially carried up every fell in the Lake District, and then climbing them myself, as well as Alps and some time in the Himalayas as well. So please don't think that I'm just sitting in an office corporately. I do know what it's like to be out on the fells. AIM. So I've been at AIM for the last 2.5 years. I'm mutual manager, but before that, I was a lawyer latterly as a partner in a city law firm, and I've spent 24 years defending personal injury claims for a whole range of insurers and large corporates. So I do have some experience and expertise in risk management, claims defensibility, documentation, etc. So I hope that's helpful today as we go on. So AIM, this is not a hard sell at all, but I just think it sets the background as to who we are and what we do. So we were set up in 2007-8 for the sole purpose of providing cost-effective, high-quality liability cover for activity providers. And we have a whole wide range of people whom we look after, from one-man bands who, like some of you, take people up the fells, up to great big multi-activity residential sites, and a whole range in between. We are a mutual, which means we're owned by our members, and we promote the best standards in safety. So enough about AIM. We're all looking at how we might be able to cope not only with lockdown, but also with the issues that the pandemic has thrown up globally. And I appreciate that some of you won't be just working in the UK, and that you might have events that you carry out in Europe and further afield. But I've been asked to look at the current issues and what the current hot topics are. And I've just set out a few here on the screen. I appreciate there's probably lots more, but these are the things that we've been asked about by our members at AIM, and also the things that I think are probably foremost in people's mind. I will stress that you know, things are changing every day. We're at the 20th of May today. We're just starting to ease out of lockdown a little bit, and there might be changes further afield, especially as we get into beginning of June and then possibly July. And also things may well change if the schools go back, and if they go back for every year rather than just some of the years that they're thinking about at the moment. So just looking at these aspects, I've said number one, property cover. We've advised our members, and I'm sure you've been thinking about this, but it's really critical during the lockdown that you still keep your property cover, because the premises and equipment can of course be vulnerable to theft and also to other issues such as fire, etc. So it's really important that even if you let your other covers lapse, your public liability cover, for example, if you're not carrying out activities, that you do retain the property cover. Secondly, employers' liability. I'm sure that staffing and the financial aspect of that has been a really big stress for everybody, and we've all had to deal with it in different ways. I really feel for so many people at the moment who've had such difficulty and have faced real problems with their companies with the lockdown and the pandemic. But the employer's liability aspect is really important, because it's a compulsory cover, as you all know, but also you should retain it, especially if you have staff who might still be working, either if they're only doing a bit of admin, or if you've got employees who are on furlough. And I know some of the restrictions have changed on that in the last week or so. But also, if you run a limited company or have one or more directors, then it's really critical that you keep your employer's liability cover up. Public liability, we found with AIM that obviously a lot of our members don't require the public liability cover at the moment because they're not carrying out any activities. So we've tried to do everything we possibly can to assist our members, and we've reduced down the covers where we can, or we've cancelled the public liability cover until people can get back and resume and reopen again. Number 4, the financial issues. Obviously, those are critical. If you're not with AIM, obviously you'll have to defer to your own insurer, but you should be asking them if they can help you. Certainly, we've put in place a holiday payment plan for 3 months, so that will assist with cash flow issues for members. We're looking at refunds, so if you don't need all your cover at the moment, we're refunding, cancelling the policies that aren't needed, and also trying to support the members where possible. And then lastly, a big smile on my face, try on claims. It's prime season, isn't it, for people to be trying on claims, spurious accidents. I would really keep abreast of any incidents that you think might turn into claims. Highlight those to your cover provider as soon as possible, because you could use this time to investigate them or at least see what you might want to do. I'm sure that there will be a lot of people feeling the financial pressure, and they can be persuaded by online advertising, also daytime television advertising. We all know that we live in far more of a blame culture at the moment. So, you know, there may be some spurious claims out there. I suspect there'll be a lot of claimant solicitors who suddenly have realised that they're not going to have as many cases coming in, so they might be looking for work. So it's just be aware of these and make sure that you're obviously not opening yourself out to spurious claims. Okay. In terms of premises and equipment, I've talked about the property aspect there, but I think it's really important at the moment to make sure that your premises are secure, especially if you're not going there every day. And I know that some policies require you for complete property cover to go into your premises or check them once every, say, 7 days or something. We don't actually have that requirement on our AIM policies, but it is really sensible if it is safe to do so, and go back to the, you know, make sure that you're adhering to the government advice. The signage reference is make sure that you're putting signage up if your premises are private, just so that you're discouraging people using them while you might not be there every day, and be aware of people who might try and access it. At least if you put signage up, you can show that you've taken every precaution to try and restrict unauthorised access to the premises, because the last thing you want is a trespasser or somebody going onto your premises and having an incident or an accident and then trying to claim later. Risk assessments. Risk assessments is a huge hot topic at the moment, and I'm sure that it's at the forefront of your minds when you're thinking about reopening or how you're going to resume your activities. And certainly it's been one of the questions that we've been asked quite a lot recently from our members. So you should obviously update your risk assessments every time you change your activity or you bring on a new activity, but also if there's any major changes, and COVID and the pandemic is obviously a major change. I would recommend that you review all your risk assessments and that you write specific ones with the COVID aspect in mind. And what I mean by the COVID aspect is that you should be assessing your activities to make sure that you can still carry them out safely, even when you're adhering to the government guidance. So, for example, if we're dealing with, say, someone that needs to wear a harness, can you properly check that harness is securely put on that person who's about to climb up something and rely on the harness? Can you do that safely from the 2-meter social distancing? If you can't, then I think there's probably a good chance that you should be saying, well, I don't think we can carry out this activity at this stage. What I'm looking at is trying to cover off any claim that you might have by a claimant who says my harness failed, or I had this issue with the equipment, and the court says, was it checked? And the reply is, well, it was visually checked from 2 meters away. I'm not sure that that's sufficiently safe, but obviously it will depend on each different activity and the type of equipment you're using. I know that there's some aspects of the industry where you can probably go back and reopen now and resume, and you can carry out that activity with the social distancing. I'm thinking possibly it will fell walking, and if the fells are open obviously and you're allowed access to them, but also maybe bushcraft, those type of activities. The activities where you need to be really hands-on and attaching people to things, I think that's going to be quite tricky. The other important thing about risk assessments, as I'm sure you're all aware, is to make sure that they're completed and carried out by somebody who's got sufficient knowledge of that activity. It's not just a tick box exercise at all. It's not a nice risk assessment that you complete and then put on the shelf when it gathers dust. It's a dynamic document that should be regularly reviewed. Bit of an odd example, but it's no good having somebody who's used to co-steering writing a risk assessment for a climbing wall. Obviously, you know, they're probably very good at health and safety, but you need somebody with a real knowledge of that activity to be able to write this risk assessment. You need to make sure that you can carry out the activity safely in terms not only of the equipment, but in terms of the hygiene aspect as well. Can you safely make sure that your equipment is all sanitized? You know, if people are using helmets, is that a sensible idea at the moment? Are you able to clean the helmets? Will any of the cleaning actually affect the ability of the equipment to do its job? I'm thinking that, you know, if you used a bleach on a buoyancy aid, it might affect the buoyancy aspect of it. You need to adhere to manufacturers' guidelines in respect of any cleaning, but this is something that's quite important looking at. I've said staff there because we need to think about staff as well, and we need to do specific risk assessments for them. Are they going to be safe coming to work? You know, vehicles, things like that. Can you do your social distancing whilst you're in your office or your premises or wherever you are? We've got a real issue at the moment at work if we go back to our office, because our lavatories are so small that actually I don't think they're 2 meters by 2 meters. So we wouldn't be able to do that safely. It'd have to be a 1 in, 1 out. You know, these are the practical aspects that you need to be thinking about and how you're going to address them. And then obviously the public. I attended a webinar last week and a discussion about public perception about returning to the outdoors. And on the one hand, providers were, some providers were saying the public are absolutely desperate to get out and about again. They feel like they've been cooped up. Once we come out of lockdown, it's going to be fantastic. Everyone will be absolutely gagging to get back out and do these activities. That's absolutely brilliant. There's also the schools aspect. And part of what we're doing with some of the other heads of sectors is to make sure that in terms of lobbying the government, we show them how important it is that for the school curricula that you still have these outdoor activities, and that learning outside the classroom, for example, is used still, and that the schools, once we go back to schools, don't just want to concentrate on the academics, and that they're still wanting to do the residential trips or the day trips or what have you. Also, we need to make sure that the public are safe. They may not want to come back. They may be really conscious and concerned about actually being in public and being out and about with lots of other people. I appreciate some people will not be as concerned as others, but you will still have that public perception. And perhaps at the end, when we have a discussion, I'd be really interested to see what kind of feedback you're getting from people as to their desire to get back out there. So it's better to be safe than to invite an accident, is basically what I say in respect to the risk assessments. In terms of accident prevention, this is what I used to do all the time, and obviously we do work with our members to help them in accident prevention. Prevention is key. Prevention is far better than cure, and if you can prevent an incident, then obviously that's much better for you, for your reputation and your brand, and also much better on your staff and participants, etc. I've said be proactive, not reactive. And in a minute, we'll look at what good risk management looks like. But it's really important that you do take the time to think about risk assessments and how you're going to prevent incidents, and spend that time now so that you can plan, especially if you're perhaps not open at the moment. It's a really good time to perhaps get your staff together, perhaps on a Zoom call like this, and to talk through your procedures and practices. One other thing I would say is that when you're looking at your risk assessments, especially if you've revised them in respect of COVID issues, then make sure that they are explained to the staff and that the staff have a good proper time to go through them and understand them, and that the staff are aware of any changes that you might have put in place. So in terms of the lessons learned, and I will come on to this a little bit later as well, but lessons learned, basically near misses are a very important part of business, because you can learn a lot from them, and a near miss is not an accident. And if you have a near miss and you can prevent an accident, then obviously that's very beneficial. So we go on to support. We really try and help our members, and I know this has been an incredibly difficult time. This slide was taken from a talk that I did prior to the pandemic and lockdown, just talking about if you have an incident or an accident. But I think the same applies today. It's always been important, and it's even more critical now. This pandemic has had a massive effect on all of us, and an impact on the staff, and we shouldn't forget that. Some people might feel panic, they might feel overwhelmed, very fearful. Daily work's impacted if you have an incident, but also I appreciate your daily work's been impacted due to the pandemic. There's a big impact on business and brand, and whilst people are going to be very, very keen to get back out there and get reopened and resuming, I think we've just got to exercise a little bit of caution and make sure that we are adhering to the government guidelines and not putting ourselves at risk, or our staff, our participants or visitors at risk. The specialist advice bit is just in respect of accidents and incidents. We would always recommend or always seek to obtain specialist advice from the different areas of the industry, and also the lawyers that we use. And I've put counselling there because I don't know if any of you are using that at the moment for your staff, but obviously that's quite a good thing to be thinking about if they need some support or some help. I said we come on to risk management. So this is just my view of how the differences between what good risk management looks like and also what poor risk management might look like. So in terms of the good risk management, and again, this is both predates the COVID pandemic, but also, you know, useful now. And as you're looking at your risk assessments and thinking about reopening, then this would be a good sort of guidance to be thinking about. So know your risks. What are your risks? The risk assessment should identify the risks inherent in every activity you're providing, and then seek to eliminate or reduce down to the lowest possible level those risks. Know your clients. We all deal now with a hugely different, diverse range of clients, ages, all different types of people coming through our doors. So know them and make sure that if one risk assessment might be fine for somebody in their sort of 40s, but have you thought about how the person in their 70s or the person who's under 10 might act as well in that activity? And if need be, have a separate assessment for them. It might seem a bit odd to say know your equipment, but know your equipment, check it, make sure that you are checking it regularly, you've got good maintenance procedures, and especially at the moment in terms of the hygiene and how you're going to disinfect your equipment, make sure that you're looking at if you can do so safely, if it's going to be effective, and get advice either from your manufacturer or perhaps from your national governing body or your industry body. As I said before, there's been lots of collaboration across the various sectors of the industry, which is absolutely brilliant, and there's a lot of information and advice out there. So, you know, do ask them, because this is important. I know there's been quite a few chat rooms and webinars about, in particular, in terms of co-steering, how they're going to make sure that their equipment, which might usually be shared between participants, is going to be safe for others to use. Know your staff. We've looked at that a little bit earlier on, but make sure that you know your staff. Have you got their training records? I appreciate that some people have a much higher turnover of staff than others, and that could just be due to seasonality. But also it's important that you work with your staff. You're responsible for them and they are responsible for you. And if you're letting them go off and instruct and look after your participants and the people that are doing your activities, it's really important that you know that they're going to do so safely and also in adherence to your standard operating procedures and your risk assessments. Know your systems. Again, that's a bit like the equipment. And it might seem a bit odd saying know your competitors. Our industry is great, isn't it? Because we do collaborate a lot and we do talk to each other, and we know the people down the road that do the same activity as us, and that's great. But sometimes you can learn a lot from your competitors, either by thinking what they do, oh, that's a good idea, I'll do that, or collaboration in terms of the issues that we're all facing at the moment, or even, oh, they're doing it like that, I don't think that's a good idea. Anyway, just an idea to know them. And then the poor risk management, so obviously it should be fairly obvious and should go without saying, but you know, poor risk management is when you don't really understand your clientele, you've got sporadic systems, your staff, the turnover's high, but you don't spend the time in training them or making sure that they know your systems properly. You don't know where your documents are, you can't find them, you have missing records. All of these are very problematic if you do have an incident and a claim, because if you cannot obtain that documentation and know where it is and pull it out for your insurers, then it's quite tricky and it really affects the defensibility of a claim. And then again, reactivity as opposed to proactivity. I'm all about proactivity and making sure that everything's in place now. I went to a very interesting seminar several years ago. I'm a big rugby fan. And it was by Clive Woodward. And he was talking about the preparation that they did for the 2003 World Cup. And the drop goal, which Johnny Wilkinson kicked over to beat Australia in Australia. And someone said to him, how do you practice that? Which seemed to be a bit of an odd question, but actually really useful answer. And he talked about what's referred to as the retentive brain. He said, if you come across a situation that you haven't dealt with before, your brain tends to go into your hard drive and think, have I dealt with this before? No. And so you don't necessarily know what to do. So you might act in a bit of sort of panic mode. However, if you have done that or come across that incident before, then you've got a bit of background already. You go to your hard drive and your brain basically says, oh, I've done this before, I know what to do, and doesn't panic as much. And he talked about that in terms of the training that they were doing with the England squad, and said that not only did they do lots of practice on the field and the kicking and the scrums and the, you know, everything else, line outs, but also they spent a long time in the classroom going over absolutely everything. So he said they'd gone through every possible move, every connotation, so that when the ball was passed to Johnny to kick over the post, he didn't think, oh God, what shall I do? Shall I kick it? Shall I pass it? He just knew exactly what to do. And I think that's really important to take into your businesses. If you can take your staff through crisis situations or scenarios, and I know that several of you probably do, and some of our members dedicate a whole day where they take their staff and they go through a crisis situation as if it's happening. Because if you've gone through it once already or twice, or you're used to doing that, then if you do hit the worst and the worst happens, I think you're in a much better position to be able to deal with it. You know where your documents are, you know who should be doing what, you know what you need to do. And I just think that's quite helpful. Looking at documentation, why is it important? It's critical. It's the best evidence you can have if you want to defend a claim. Contemporaneous documentation is really important. If I had £1 for every time I saw an accident report form, and then when the claimant's version of events came in and it was completely different, I'd be a very, very rich woman. You possibly might have seen the same, but it's really critical that you are able to pull out your documentation if you need to do so for an insurer. And I've said there what you need to produce. So risk assessments, we've talked about that already. Standard operating procedures, make sure they're up to date. Make sure they're covering any new activities that you're doing, or any new staff that you've got, or any new clientele you might have. Staff qualifications and training records, again, very, very important. Make sure they're up to date, make sure that they have got what they say they've got, and make sure that if you need to be doing any internal training, then those training records are kept up to date as well. I appreciate that lots of you probably do your own, and lots of you, if you're running businesses, may well have external companies to assist you with this. Maintenance and equipment checks, document them. It's fantastic having the availability of the documentation to show when you checked that equipment and who did it and what was checked. I fully appreciate that you will be doing dynamic equipment checks every time you're going out or you're taking equipment out with you. That's fine, but at least have an annual one where you sit down and you actually do it almost like an audit, or even 6 monthly ones, so that you can check that everything is working, it's properly, it's in date. So things like, I know you guys probably don't use buoyancy aids, but in terms of buoyancy aids, you know, should they be discarded after the 3 years manufacturer's guidelines, or the 5 years, or what have you? You know, make sure that you're aware of those dates. Statements. At the time of an incident, a statement is really important. Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that you don't look after the injured person first, or that you ask them about the details of the incident whilst they're needing, you know, medical assistance at all. But as soon as you can, take statements from the personnel involved, so the instructor, any people with the person at the time, and get their version of events as to what happened. Again, you probably wouldn't be amazed, but it is incredible the number of times that the statement at the time is very, very different from then the letter before action or the formal legal claim that comes through. And if you can actually produce the contemporaneous statement at the time, that's pretty compelling evidence. CCTV, probably not applicable for you guys, but obviously if you've got premises, then it is applicable. Just be aware that if you have an incident, or if you get a letter where you think you have an incident, even if there's no formal claim, but you think that it might turn sour or you might get something, then please do remember to hold on to your CCTV, because the majority of systems will overwrite the film every 30 days or so. So make sure you pull it out, because if you can retain it at the time, obviously much better than 2 years down the line when you get a letter in and then you say, oh, we haven't got the CCTV anymore, but actually she didn't fall this way, she fell like this, but you haven't got the evidence to prove it. So that's quite useful. Photos, everybody's got a mobile phone with a camera on it now, probably even my mum, so it should be fairly accessible for you to be able to take a photograph of the location, the situation, the weather. I've put weather reports in there as well, because you obviously, if you're out and about on the mountain, you will be looking at the weather before you go. You might decide to go a different route due to the weather, and weather conditions obviously change very, very quickly. So you need to keep an eye on those, and it's just quite useful. I attended a training session last week, and people were talking about getting the weather reports and retaining them on their phone as the evidence. We did have an incident a while ago with one of our members who had recorded the weather, and then when they went back in a week or so later just to double check and to get another report, one of the weather, they had 3 people that they were using, 3 weather providers, and one of them had actually changed the weather from what they'd anticipated it to be to actually what it had been, which wasn't very helpful, because it made it look as if the person shouldn't have gone out in those weather conditions. So just be aware of that. And then lastly, know where your documents are. Obviously, really important. If there's only one person in the company responsible for the documents, then please make sure that other people are aware of where they are, just in case that person's ill or is off or anything happens to them. It might be stating the obvious, but it's quite important that it's a sharing thing and it's not just left to one person in the company. Right, lessons learned. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and basically lessons learned is what can you do if you have an incident or a near miss, and how can you learn from them. They are a very, very good training tool. They provide the opportunity to check your systems and hopefully prevent a serious incident. And sometimes accidents are just that, despite the blame culture in which we live. Today's blame culture tends to lead people to assume that it's always somebody else's fault, it's not their fault, and that there should be a claim. So if we can avoid incidents, obviously that's much, much better. I've said avoid a recurrence, obviously that's the main thing. Use it in staff training. You can use them as a really good method to review your own methods and look at what perhaps you could do better, or make sure that you're doing everything and it's absolutely fine. I would really encourage a culture of reporting near misses within your business and organisation. Don't let your staff be afraid to tell you of incidents or near misses or issues. If you've got an open culture, then they won't feel worried about it, and you're probably more likely to get more out of them, and also you're more likely to prevent any accidents or incidents happening in the future. You can learn as a business, you can learn as a sector, and we should all learn as an industry. We all work in an absolutely fantastic industry, don't we? And the various sectors. And we really need to keep that fantastic brand and reputation that we've all got. So hopefully that helps in respect to lessons learned. So just to, in summary, be proactive. I think that's really important. Review your systems, especially now. Look at your risk assessments and revise them where you need to, especially in respect of COVID. I'm sure I'll get some questions about that in a minute. That's absolutely fine. Train your staff and have regular reviews. That's all I wanted to say. I wanted to keep it fairly short and sweet. Those are my details. If you want to get in touch with me, I am more than happy. If I can help with anything, then obviously please let me know. I'll just pass back to Cress now, and then we can go to any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sophia. So I hope that was really helpful. We've got a little bit of time for questions. So there's obviously a couple of ways we can do this, and between Nick and myself and Sophia, we'll try and manage it amongst the different screens. So you've got some options. You can start typing a question, or you can raise your hand, and hopefully we'll cover as much as we can. Okay, so we'll just wait for those to come in.
Dave's got his hand up. I think I might know what you're going to say, David.
Yeah. Is it okay for me to ask my question, or should I wait?
No, go for it, Dave.
Okay. Hi. Thanks very much for Sophia. Sophia, that was really helpful. I'm sort of working with here with a few different hats on, one for myself and one for the Association of Mountaineering Instructors. We've been informed by the people who insure AMI and the people who separately insure AMI members that the industry in general is seeking to exclude COVID-19 cover from liability policies. So many underwriters are seeking to exclude it from all aspects of liability cover, some leaving it within employer's liability but excluding it from public liability. And generally speaking, having sort of sought some independent advice, which we'd like to share with our members soon, we've been told not to be too concerned about that, in that it seems to be quite difficult potentially for a client to bring a claim against a leader in relation to COVID-19 transmission. Because number one, we've been advised that if they were to do that, then it'd be very easy for the leader to counterclaim. Number two, it would be very hard for the person bringing the claim to pinpoint the source of transmission to be the leader. And then sort of number three, really to just be a bit concerned about if, the only perhaps chance of it being easy to prove would be a case of criminal negligence, in which case cover wouldn't exist anyway. So look, I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that in the industry are, whether we should be concerned that people are seeking to exclude COVID-19 cover, whether those kind of those issues are reasonable to sort of put forward to members, and yeah, if you could discuss that, that'd be great.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, David. Yes, the industry, the market, insurance market as a whole has looked at this, and certainly it's almost globally acknowledged now that there will be exclusions to exclude specifically COVID-19. I'm sure you'll all be aware of the issues that have faced the insurance industry in respect of business interruption claims and the exclusions that have applied on those. In terms of AIM, our backing insurers, they're about to change in August anyway, but our backing insurers at the beginning of April sent us new wording to be used on all further renewals from the 1st of April, which specifically excludes COVID. I don't think it's unusual at all, and we are seeing it across the market. In terms of AIM, it's just on the public liability policy, not the EL policy, but I have had intel from the market and other people. Regis runs a number of mutuals. I just look after AIM, but in terms of the other mutuals, some of the insurers have sought to include that on the EL policy as well. You've hit the nail on the head, David, about the claims. I think it's going to be very difficult to prove that you evidentially that you caught the virus from either your instructor, if you're a participant, or from a co-participant. I think I'll talk about the EL aspect in a minute, but we've been discussing whether or not it would be sensible on the terms and conditions for people to ask participants to tick a form to say whether or not they or any member of their household with whom they are residing have had the COVID virus or been poorly in the last, say, 14 days or 21 days, because I know that there's a difference between some people have had an incubation period of 21 days. I don't see an issue with that. It was raised as whether or not you would be discriminating against people if you then said, well, you can't participate because you've had it. I disagree with that. This is not a legal advice, by the way, it's my personal view, but I disagree because COVID isn't currently listed as one of the items for which you can bring a discriminatory claim, not like hepatitis or any of the gender or race issues. Secondly, from a provider's point of view, you've got to show that you're doing everything possible to keep the participants, visitors and your staff safe. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask people to tick that form to say that they haven't had it and that you can exclude them if they have. If you use the 14-day period, and if they tick that they've had COVID or someone in their household has within the preceding 14 days, then they shouldn't be there anyway, should they? Because they should be self-isolating in terms of the government guidance. So you can restrict them from doing it on that basis. If they have had it and they tick no, then you've got evidence as the provider that you've asked everybody and you haven't had anybody that said they have. So you come back to the evidential point. I think the employer's liability aspect is slightly trickier. I think you're entitled as an employer, and because the standards are much higher and your responsibilities are higher than with perhaps the public liability aspects, I know we're not in strict liability anymore in respect of some of the regulations, but the standard of care and the duty of care is quite high. Then I think that you really should be asking your staff how they are and whether or not they've had any such issues. I hope that answers your question, David. Sorry, it was rather a long-winded response, but
a long-winded question. Thanks very much.
No, that's okay. Pleasure. I can only see one screen at the moment, so I've stopped screen sharing, so I hope that's okay so that people can see each other. So I don't know if anyone else got a question.
Yeah, Mark Garland has wrote a question. Mark, I don't know if you would like to
Hi, Mark.
say that. Oh, Mark,
I think you're muted.
Sorry. Hello.
Hi.
Morning, everybody. So if the devil cast his net now, I recognise so many names in this list. So, anyway, yeah, good. So I TA for a lot of centres, and a lot of centres have been asking, when can we go back? What should we do? All the rest of it. So I've just advised people, if you think you can run an activity within current guidelines, then please do. But what you need to consider is, can you initiate a rescue? For example, can you tow somebody co-steering? If somebody's trapped on a climb, can you get to them and maintain social distancing? And think about first aid considerations as well. How are you going to deal with any first aid considerations without putting yourself or them at danger? So just wonder any advice that you'd got, or any other thoughts that people have said.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, the first aid is quite an important one at the moment. I mean, obviously, we've got to make sure people are safe. And if you can't give them first aid safely, then, should you be doing it? One of our, I saw a thing that came up the other day where one member said, well, we're not going to go anywhere that an ambulance can't get to easily. So we're not going to go sort of off-piste. It was co-steering, so it's a bit different, but this will apply to you guys as well. I've also seen one of our members wanted to do some first aid training, physical first aid training, and they were being advised that in respect of the resuscitation vaccination doll, that now we're just doing the presses on the chest and we're not doing the mouth to mouth. So that prevents that. I suppose in a way you could require your staff to wear PPE if they've got to deal with somebody. But I think it just goes back to if you can't do it safely, then, you know, maybe it's a bit premature to be racing back in at the moment. I fully appreciate people want to get back out there, and I fully appreciate people have business and financial concerns, but it is a real issue. So I don't know what other people have thought about first aid, or if anyone's back out there and how they've dealt with the first aid issues. But thank you, Mark. It's a really good question.
So just looking at the questions, Jay, can I just ask, has your question, do you think, been answered? Jay wrote a question.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I was just wondering, you know, I think there's plenty of activities we could all find ways to deliver in a socially distanced manner, but the reality is, if you have an incident, which we know sometimes are going to be just sheer accidents, it's unlikely the incident management process or the first aid or casualty care or whatever that comes after that will take priority over social distancing. There's a big collection of people here. I wondered if people had any thoughts really on whether the knowledge that incident management will not be socially distanced possible had stopped them from going out. Personally, I'm not running because I don't feel I can deal with all the potential things that could happen, but I'm in a similar situation to Mark. I've got people saying, "Oh, can we start again?" And yeah, I think so. It's just nice to hear a bit of conversation and chat, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm just looking through the chat as well, just to answer some of the questions and stuff. And I think, you know, first aid is one of those really important things at the moment. Really interesting, Kate saying that Raw Adventures have sent a survey out to clients to ask if they'd mind putting forward the medical details. Without wanting to go through all the GDPR, then I don't see why it's not a good idea. I think most members of the public would feel quite pleased and quite comforted by the fact that you're asking, so that they feel much safer as well, that you're not exposing them to the risks of a participant in their group having the having had the illness recently.
Right. Are there other questions? There's one from Pete and Alex.
Oh yeah, Pete, about the risk assessment. I would still do a risk assessment if you know. I think it's Lady Justice Smith in the case of Irwin said years ago that risk assessments are really critical, and that if you hadn't done a risk assessment, but if you had an incident and you'd not done a risk assessment, but were you to have completed one and the accident could have been avoided, then there was going to be liability. Not every situation requires a risk assessment. I think maybe she meant written risk assessments. I know that you guys will be doing a lot of dynamic risk assessments because you're out and about all the time. But I think really, I know that the HSE say it's a legal requirement to do the risk assessment, but you don't need to record them if you've got fewer than 5 employees. But I just think it's really good practice.
Chris, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Sophia. Do you think that providers generally, I was actually thinking of climbing walls, but it applies to anybody in any ratio, I think, should ask their clients from now on to, and often we have asked for an acknowledgement of risk, but to specifically state acknowledgement of risk with regard to CV-19 as well?
Yes, I think this is what we've sort of been touching on, isn't it? So I think you can at the moment. I don't see why not. Perhaps as we come out of lockdown and as we go out of social distancing, it won't be as necessary. But I think at the moment it's useful. Going back onto what I said, you know, about making sure that you've taken all reasonable steps to keep your staff, visitors, and participants safe. I think it is. I can't see the issue with doing it at the moment.
Right, because I was talking
Legal
to.
advice, by the way, but I mean, from just defending claims previously and looking at risk management. Yeah.
I was talking to my local climbing wall manager last night, and who's busy writing her risk assessments, and her view is that when climbing walls in this case are allowed to open, and also when the rest of us can work in the ways that we do, that really the most important risk assessment is going to be the one done by the client who has decided that it's okay to come into your facility for them. And that's the one that's going to make the difference. And I suppose implicit in that is that they're prepared to accept a certain level of risk, and that will depend from person to person and their own circumstances. So I kind of wondered that if that was actually acknowledged somewhere, by acknowledging that there is a risk with CV19, they're basically saying, I've made my own risk assessment to come forward to you as a provider. Is that something that would be recognised later were an issue to arise?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I kind of misunderstood when you asked the question. So I'm really sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think acknowledging basically goes to the issue of valenti, doesn't it? So
Yes.
you accept the risks that you are aware about,
Yes.
and that you're obliged as the provider to notify the participant of the likely risks. I always have this discussion with the ABC and the climbing walls about whether they should say death, because there is always a risk of death when you're climbing, and some walls leave it out and some walls don't. I personally don't think there's an issue in putting that in and saying I appreciate that there is a risk. The climbing walls at the moment, it's very difficult for them, because initially I think we thought at AIM that the people that would be most likely to be up and running and get back to business as normal financially, etc., would be the climbing walls. But actually with the social distancing, I think it's going to be really, really difficult for them to do that. My personal view is I don't see an issue with that. But I'd be really interested to see what other people think about it. It's a very good point about the client, and going back to the brand and reputation as well. You want to make sure that your brand and reputation are intact, and you don't want to be seen as somebody that is exposing people to the risk of being ill while they're participating or attending your site and your premises. And I'm sure we'll see stuff in the press about that. The media, in my view, have not bathed themselves in glory over the last 9 weeks. And, I can see that as soon as somebody alleges they've caught it at a climbing wall or a gym or, a swimming pool, then it will be all over the press. And it's very, very difficult to then back down from that. But my initial view is that I don't think that would be an issue, but I'd be really interested to see what other people think about that.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm conscious that on the chat we have a number of questions. There's a really interesting, conversation about PPE and first aid and the guidelines. And thank you, by the way, for helpfully directing us to the mountain rescue guidelines about that being with regard to first aid. And as I'm sure, as Paolo's suggesting, it's a concerning issue. And I think, in terms of the PPE aspect, he's asking for examples of staff, where they've taken this question higher in government. I'm not sure if that's an appropriate one if that's helpful for people to address. Sophia, can you see
Yes, I was just reading through those.
It's a big topic, I appreciate.
Yeah, it's we have been talking back at the ranch about whether or not you can provide your activities safely wearing PPE, and some activities you'll be able to and some you won't. I think it's, I'm not sure I want to comment further on the PPE aspect, because it is a bit of a sort of nebulous topic at the moment, and it's, there's lots of dispute about what you should wear, what you shouldn't wear. What's safe to wear. But I think, I would, like I said earlier, I would defer to the mountain rescue stuff. Seems to be quite important from your sort of national governing body perhaps aspect.
Okay, thank you. So it's what I'm suggesting is that perhaps we need to, it might be helpful for us to just check in with Mountain Rescue and to, you know, just, I appreciate things are changing all the time, and maybe, you know, just make sure we're sending out some updates for people to, I guess, interpret and make their best decisions.
Chris, I just wanted to mention something, if that's all right. Because Sophia was talking about incidents and near misses, I guess it was just to draw your attention, if you don't already know about it, to the BMC's incident and near miss reporting area. I don't quite know what you call it, but it's a really useful list of incidents that you can read through, and they've been anonymised. But if you are somebody who works on your own a lot, you're not in a big centre where lots of near misses happen, they can just be a really useful. It can be a really useful tool, and potentially something to recommend to your participants as well, that they have a read of, because it happens a lot. That was all.
Right. Chris, can I add something as well?
Yeah,
we're chucking in, just to let people know, there's a really useful article that's just appeared on the BMC's website, where Professor Ian Hall, who advises the BMC's Access Group, he's a chess consultant at Nottingham, has discussed, just given some very good advice about participating, and you can translate that to working in the outdoors, and how best to protect yourself and those around you from the virus. It's just very clear, simple advice.
Yeah.
I think I would just, you know, add on that it is an ever-changing world at the moment, and it's a fast-developing, ever-changing situation. You know, we should be getting another government update at the beginning of June. We'll get another one on the 4th of July, I think. And I think the main thing is to just make sure that you're keeping abreast of that, and you're keeping up to date with it, and that you're acting on current advice and guidance from the government. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. I'm just looking, I can't say, Kate's mentioned the Outdoor Alliance in Wales have produced other useful document, so there's definitely helpful information. As we know, it's constantly changing. Just looking to see if there are any final questions. We do acknowledge that you might go away and other questions will pop into your head, and as Sophia has kindly said, she is happy to answer them. But if not, then do drop us a line, and once we've edited this version of the webinar and it goes out, we can add the questions in like an FAQ. So hopefully that will be helpful, and obviously for people who haven't been able to make it this morning. I'm just looking at one more question just before we, yeah, let's have a look. Bear with us. Yeah, the question about, do we have to treat all our clients as if they've had COVID-19? Sophia, do you want to say?
I suppose in a way it's belt and braces, isn't it? I saw that on the chat. I've just shared my screen now, so I'm not sure I can see the chat again. But I think it's not bad practice, is it, to treat them all as if they've had it and they tell you that they haven't. But equally, if you're treating everybody as if they've had it, are you expecting them to pass it on to other people? I think you should just definitely ask. I think there's really good merit in asking people to confirm that they haven't had the symptoms or been in contact with anybody in their household who has had the symptoms. And then I think that you've done all that you possibly can to ensure that you've, you know, risk assessed that aspect properly there. So I'm not sure that answered it actually, Chris, sorry, but
no, but thank you. As you say, things are constantly changing. We just, you know, people will just be wanting to make the most informed and best decisions that they can at the time. So, okay, thank you. So, Yeah, I think just thanks very much. A huge thanks to Sophia and Activities Industry Mutual for the presentation this morning, which we really hope was helpful. And we do acknowledge that there will be other questions and things will emerge, you know, as things change pretty much daily. So thanks very much to Sophia, and we look forward to listening to Bill's talk next week. So we hope that many of you will come along to that. We had interesting conversation around decision making based on research from some of the conferences that they've had up at the lodge, at Glenmore Lodge. So do look out. Nick is going to send some other PR out for other webinars that we have lined up for you. But we do really appreciate your feedback. We're, you know, trying our best to support you, you know, as the weeks move forwards. So many thanks, and yeah, do give us some feedback, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And thanks again to Sophia, and have a great day, everyone. Okay.
Thanks, Sophia.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all the lovely comments as well.
Thanks a lot.
Well done.
Bye.
Thank you.